So thank you, everybody. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Leanne DeRouche. I'm the Executive Director of DV LEAP, the Domestic Violence, Legal Empowerment, and Appeals Project. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you all here today and introduce our guests. A couple of housekeeping matters. Most of you have already discovered the chat. We had over 200 people sign up today, which is just fantastic. Really thrilled with the turnout. Please use the chat as a way to interact with each other as well as throughout. And then at the end, you can also post your questions. We'll be monitoring the chat, post your questions throughout. At the end, I will be posing those to Joan. And so we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end today as well. I don't want to take up a lot of time up front because you all came to hear the conversation between Joan and Sasha. So with that, I'm going to just mention a couple of other items. First of all, I want to say thanks to DV LEAP's Advocacy Council, specifically Emma O'Rourke-Friel. This was her brainchild and her idea. If you're not familiar with the Advocacy Council, they serve as ambassadors. They are young professionals who serve as ambassadors for DV LEAP. If you're interested in that, you don't have to be a lawyer. We would welcome that. So please you could reach out over the chat actually, or to me or to Flora. We'd be happy to connect you, help you learn more about the Advocacy Council. So thanks to them, thanks to Flora Patel, our development coordinator, who, as I always say, is the magic behind these events and does all the behind the scenes work for us. So thank you so much, Flora. Couldn't do this without you. Also, if you're not familiar, DV LEAP is based in Washington, D.C. We are the only nonprofit in the United States that provides pro bono legal appeals for survivors of domestic violence. And you'll learn more about what we're doing in the conversation today. We do have, I was supposed to tell you, per orders from Flora, that DV LEAP now has merchandise. Flora's going to be we have our own swag. We're very excited about that. You can get your t-shirts and your tote bags and your coffee mugs. So Flora's going to put the link in the chat. You can check that out today as well. And I'll have a few more other announcements for you at the end. And we'll be putting some other information in the chat as well. Please put October 10th on your calendar. We will be coming together for DV LEAP's annual event. It's going to be a little bit different this year. We're going to be planting trees in honor of survivors. It's going to be a Sunday afternoon picnic. So October the 10th, 1 to 3 p.m., more information to come, but look forward to seeing you all at our picnic. So please get October 10th on your calendar. All right. So with that, I want to get us started here and just say thank you so much to Joan Meier for attending and participating in this event today. As most of you know, or may not know, Joan is actually the founder of DV LEAP. And we're just thrilled to have her back today to talk about one of her many areas of expertise, which is around parent alienation. Sasha is going to do, and domestic violence, of course. Sasha's going to do a little bit more of a broader introduction. So I'm going to leave that to Sasha, but just to say thanks again to Joan. It's an honor for me to serve as executive director of the organization that Joan founded in 2003 and to continue to build on her legacy and her inspiring vision to provide legal appeals for survivors. So thanks, Joan, for your presence today and for joining us. And I want to say just a little bit about Sasha Drobnick, who is DV LEAP's legal director, and also will be engaging in the conversation with Joan today. Sasha's been with DV LEAP for 9 years. She had very large shoes to fill when she moved into the legal director position and has just embraced that role and is just, like Joan, a rock star. And it is also for me a privilege to work with just remarkable, incredible staff such as Sasha. I feel very fortunate to work with such a remarkable human and also just fabulous advocate for survivors. So thank you, Sasha, for the work that you do for DV LEAP and for survivors, and also for leading us in this conversation today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sasha.
Okay, well, thanks, Leanne. And hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And hi, Joan. So excited to be able to interview you today.
Me too.
Yeah, I know, right? I've been given strict timing guidelines, which don't allow me to even scratch the surface of your many, many, many accomplishments. So I just want to say personally, I'm so grateful for the privilege to have worked for you at DV LEAP for eight years, right? In addition to being my boss, you've been a mentor and a friend and a true inspiration to me, but I think to anyone who's familiar with your work, your passion for justice, not just for survivors, but more broadly, your truly brilliant advocacy as an appellate litigator, your groundbreaking research and scholarship. I understand you just received yet another award, right, from APSAC, with the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, for your work on behalf of child survivors. Congratulations, so well deserved. It's one of many, many awards and recognitions that you've received. So congratulations. You founded DV LEAP, you turned it into, or grew it into, a national organization advocating for survivors, both individually and systemically, changing the law on their behalf. And now that it's sufficiently DV LEAP kind of old enough to stand on its own 2 feet, you've pivoted and created a new center, the National Family Violence Law Center. So would you tell us a little bit about your new center and how your vision for your new center builds on, and maybe differs from, that you had for DV LEAP?
Okay, Sasha, before I do that, I just have to say I'm a little wordless because that was so beautiful and kind and unexpected. Thank you very much. I could not have been happier to leave DV LEAP in the capable hands of Leanne and you. And I know you're going strong, and it's really heartwarming to know that my baby is becoming a young adult, if not a full-fledged mature adult. So it's wonderful to be back. So yes, the National Family Violence Law Center at GW, I launched it with the idea that the research I had done in my last few years at DV LEAP, while I was there, I was doing some scholarly research with a team on a funded grant from the National Institute of Justice to try to show empirically what you and I were seeing in the courts, and what we were hearing from all over the country, which was that women who were reporting family abuse, whether child abuse or adult abuse by a father, were losing custody to the alleged abusers and were being demonized in court and often losing all access to their children even. And this was something everyone in the field seemed to know, but the family courts didn't seem to know it. And there were a lot of people in the middle, like lawmakers and some judges, who just had no clue. And I decided, and then the media weren't taking it seriously either. And I decided we needed data to see whether it was true or whether we were seeing a particularly bad slice of the world. And of course, the data, it took us 5 years to collect the data and analyze even the first swath of the data. And it totally strongly reinforced what we were seeing and showed empirically that courts are really rejecting these claims, and particularly child sexual abuse and child abuse claims, and that women are losing custody at shocking rates in those cases. And it showed that parental alienation is kind of doubling the risks for women in these cases, parental alienation cross claims by alleged abusers. So the data was really important. And then it felt really important to get the data out and to do more research, building on that data and other research. And I thought that I was sort of turning to more of a system reform focus, less of an individual advocacy focus, which DV LEAP does so very well. And more of a, how can I get the word out on a broader level and change the system and use perhaps an academic platform to do that. So I decided that going back to GW was the best way to do that, and launched the National Family Violence Law Center there. I'm very pleased to say that it has been doing swimmingly well. And I was lucky enough to hire my first colleague, Danielle Pollack, who's not a lawyer, but is an incredible policy advocate and expert, who hails from Pennsylvania, but is doing work with 10 different states already on behalf of this center. And so, yeah, the idea was really to move much more pointedly to a system reform level, and also to deepen and broaden the academic pieces of my work. I am hoping, among other things, in addition to doing more scholarship that tries to get the data and the research out more broadly, I'm trying to speak to communities that have not really understood what's going on, but are influential. And one of those communities is, believe it or not, the academic community, the family law world, family law academe. because what I've realized is that most folks who are teaching family law and are doing scholarship are completely unaware of how bad things are for victims of abuse in court. And so they're teaching things like the importance of shared parenting, and they're assuming that abuse is handled appropriately. And so finally started doing scholarship that I'm hoping will speak to them, to wake them up. They have a lot of influence on other groups, including forensic professionals, journals that publish for forensic professionals. They're on editorial boards of those journals. So I'm kind of using this new platform to try to speak to groups that are not as obvious, but are actually quite influential in the big picture. And the other group that I'm hoping to speak to a little bit is the child advocacy and juvenile justice world, where there's a real lack of understanding of what goes on in family court, and some problems flow from that. So some of my work is getting into that issue. So I'm hoping to have conferences with those constituents where we can really sort of elevate the policy concerns to these new constituencies and get more support for the reforms that need to happen.
So you stepped back from DV LEAP to just kind of relax and not do much, it sounds like, right? You're just kind of on vacation a little bit.
Yeah, I thought it was time to put my feet up as an academic. Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me at all.
I mean, I will say, to be honest, but I will say,
you are
the intensity of the work. The intensity of the work at DV LEAP. The deadlines of all the litigation are more demanding in some ways. So my hat is off to you, Sasha, for sustaining it.
But your center, that's super exciting. It sounds like you're tackling family court reform on several fronts, which I don't think I totally realized that you were doing both the legislative level as well as the academic and scholarship level. It's so important. And as I say, so exciting. So in addition to founding a new center and pursuing your scholarship and being a clinical law professor at George Washington University Law School, you also recently were featured as an expert in the documentary film Allen v. Farrow, which is something we're all interested in hearing about today. The documentary presented in compelling detail the circumstances surrounding the criminal case against Woody Allen for sexually abusing his then 7-year-old daughter, Dylan. For those of you who haven't seen the documentary or not familiar, it also covers his attempt, Allen's attempt to gain custody of Dylan, as well as her 2 siblings. So, Joan, how did you get involved in the documentary?
It's interesting. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I was contacted by the producers at some point in their process. And I think, well, there's someone out in California who says she's the one who gave them my name, but I have a feeling they heard my name from a bunch of different sources. The producers are experts in this kind of issue area. They had done The Hunting Ground, which was about campus sexual assault. They'd done one about military sexual assault. They know how to plug in to advocacy worlds, and they talked to everyone. Like every time I turned around, they had talked to the producer. So somebody gave my name to them as an expert on parental alienation and what goes on in the courts, and they interviewed me. Now, what's interesting, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school to say, when they interviewed me, I kept saying, what does this have to do with the Allen v. Farrow story? And the producer who was interviewing was like, oh, I don't know, you're the expert on parental alienation. I said, yeah, but what does that have to do with the Allen v. Farrow story? He's like, oh, I don't know, we'll figure it out. And I thought, I'm never going to show up in this film because they don't even know what I'm relevant to. I don't know what I'm relevant to. I didn't know all the details that I learned when I watched the film and then began to understand the relevance, but they were not answering my question about my relevance. So I was quite pleasantly surprised when, I think it was 3 years later, maybe, they contacted me and said, it's coming out in a month. We need to just clean up a couple items. And I worked with them the month before it got released to do that.
Interesting. And we'll talk specifically more about parental alienation in a couple minutes, but I didn't realize that alienation was underlying his custody claims. And so that was a big surprise to me too. But anyway, so the documentary was difficult to watch. Obviously, nobody wants to even conceive of children being abused, much less being abused by someone who's loved and trusted, and in this case, sexually abused by a father. But talk a little bit about how common it is for abuse allegations, sexual or physical, to be part of custody proceedings.
I will. Before I do that, there's one more thing I thought the audience might find interesting about the film that I wanted to throw out there, which was interesting about the link to alienation. It turns out, and I learned this from someone I know in New York who's very plugged in, that Richard Gardner, who is the inventor of parental alienation syndrome, he was then at Columbia. He was supposedly an adjunct, but I'm told he was extremely influential in the psychiatry department at Columbia. Mia, you may recall, took Dylan to a psychiatrist at Columbia. One of the things that happened wrong in that story is that she walked right into the lion's den of people who were big on denying sexual abuse. And I think that probably informed Woody's strategy to throw out parental alienation as kind of the song he was going to sing. That I just thought that was very interesting, and I had no idea before I spoke to my friend after the film aired. Okay, on the question of child sexual abuse.
No, wait. So wait, now
since
you brought that, no, but
okay.
Since you brought that up, I'm just curious. Do you think that is there any link to the forensic sexual abuse violation evaluation from Yale that completely denied Dylan's disclosures? Do you think there was any influence there?
The evaluation at the Yale Child Study Center?
Where they found that she was,
is that the one you mean?
Having magical thinking and completely discredit her.
Sasha, I'm going to try going off video because you have frozen for me, so I'm not hearing you. Let me try that. Okay, could you try saying again?
I was just
what you were asking?
I was just wondering if you thought there was any connection between Gardner's influence at Columbia at the time and the fact that the Yale forensic evaluation disbelieved Dylan and discredited her.
I have no idea, and your guess is as good as mine. I doubt that Gardner specifically influenced this Yale Study Center, but I don't doubt at all that Woody Allen influenced this Yale, and Yale influenced this Child Study Center, because that had otherwise been known as a very respected, reliable, good truth teller about child abuse. And it was so shocking to see what they did in this case. I can only assume there was some major interference that went on.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
No, not at all. So should I go back to child sexual abuse allegations in general?
Yeah, just generally. I mean, I think it's the story, the real story is surprising. So if you could just talk a little bit.
Yeah, so many of the audience, perhaps not all, are aware that when mothers allege child sexual abuse in a custody battle, it backfires royally, and it is actually the kiss of death. I used to always say you have to make your strongest possible case for abuse in custody litigation. But if someone came to me and said child sexual abuse, I'd say, don't even bring it up now. I would say that now based on the strength of my data, but you know, and many on this webinar know, that it is just disastrous to bring that up in family court because women get punished for it. They get treated as the queens of alienation by raising child sexual abuse. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Woody used alienation. PAS was invented around child sexual abuse. It was more or less invented to deny child sexual abuse claims. And even though the alienation theory, the way it's used now and the way it's written about in scholarship, et cetera, doesn't specify that it's about child sexual abuse, it is most powerful, and our data proves this, when used to deny child sexual abuse. So I can't give any data on how often sexual abuse is an issue in cases, but I can say that the most stunning piece of data out of our study was that out of approximately 50, and I'm saying approximately for reasons I can explain if anyone cares, out of approximately 50 cases where mothers alleged child sexual abuse and fathers cross-claimed alienation, only one court accepted the sexual abuse claim. That means that 49 or so kids were sent into ongoing danger, if you believe all of those allegations, or at least other research shows that 2/3 to 3/4 of the time those allegations are true. So at least 2/3 to 3/4 of 49 people were sent into ongoing danger with a sexual abuser. So sexual abuse is really the kind of the ground zero or the nuclear bomb in family court, and alienation is at its most powerful in that context.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I you've alluded to, our audience here, I think is more familiar with that dynamic and how it can play out. And you've talked generally about parental alienation, but can you speak, kind of ground it more in what happened actually here, and that, so he was able to, Alan was able to flip what were pretty reasonable steps by Mia Farrow, once not only Dylan disclosed, but the babysitter reported. And he was able to flip that all against her and instead frame it as her being spiteful about his relationship with Suni. So can you just flesh that out?
Well, that was what was so remarkable watching the film. And that's why Danielle and I wrote an op-ed that was published on the Medium about the lessons the film has for us today, because his flipping the script and seizing the narrative is exactly what you see many, many abusers do, particularly high power abusers, either high socioeconomic status or professional or skillful in other ways types of abusers. They flip the script, they make the protective parent out to be the abuser, the psychological abuser, and they make themselves out to be the innocent victim of these evil, venal allegations that are being used. And it's so ironic that Woody was able to use his relationship with Suni in that way, because anyone objective looking at that would say, whoa, he's having sex with not only his girlfriend's daughter, but someone he was in a paternal role with. He was there in a paternal role with all the children, including Suni, and it was high school when he starts sleeping with her. And nobody goes from that to, well, yeah, I bet he probably did abuse Dylan. They go to, oh, she's jealous. So you take the obvious facts that lead in an obvious direction and you just literally turn them 180 and say, oh no, actually they lead in this other opposite direction. And what's amazing is how willing our whole culture is to accept the flipped script. I mean, the degree of demonizing of women and women who call out sexual abuse is measurable from the effectiveness of that flipping of the narrative. I'm just going to throw out something else that I just learned recently, thanks to our good friend Paul Griffin at Child Justice, who did the digging. And he found that the ABA, American Bar Association, and one of the most esteemed evidence experts in law, his name is Wigmore, and he wrote a treatise on evidence, and everybody looks to that for evidence guidance. Wigmore and the ABA in the, I don't know, 40s or 50s or 30s, a while ago, published a statement that when women allege sexual assault, it should be understood that young women in particular tend toward hysteria around issues like that, and they should be psychiatrically examined before anyone takes their allegations seriously. This is printed. I have it. Thanks to Paul Griffin, I have that. And that tells you how deep and how respected the idea is of women lying about sexual assault. So this is just a great manifestation of that in this story and in stories we see all over the country.
Yeah, and just to echo the complete, almost parallel universe feel of Mia becoming the bad person in this when, as you say, Woody is sleeping with her teenage daughter. It did really crystallize how powerful the narrative is, and that your Wigmore piece sounds like Alienation, right? I mean, it sounds like it's cut of the same cloth,
It's exactly the same. It's another version. I just saw a commenter saying it's like the Salem witch trials. It really is. It is just how many ways can we demonize women who speak truth? I don't know about the Salem witches and whether they were speaking truth, and someone here may know more. But how many ways can we demonize and pathologize women, particularly when they're calling out men for abuse? And it seems to be an endless number of ways. It just keeps morphing into the language that a given era deems acceptable.
So the difference here, though, and I think one of the other experts that spoke on the film mentioned how ubiquitous the claims of alienation are, but usually these claims are not brought by Woody Allen, right? Not brought by someone with such power and who's so beloved, nationally, internationally respected. So what can you talk about what you see as kind of the differences, but also the similarities in terms of him being able to leverage his kind of unique power to make alienation claims stick versus the power that they still seem to have even when it's not Woody Allen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one of the reasons Danielle and I wrote this op-ed, because we didn't want people, actually Ronan Farrow, among other people, kind of thinks that this was unique and this is out of date and it doesn't happen anymore. And we wanted to disabuse the world of the idea that that it's any better now, or any better really when it's not Woody Allen. And so, and I think that Flora may post that commentary that we wrote at some point in the chat. Anyway, Woody Allen had a particular platform and he had so much of a following that he was able to, he had enormous power in terms of the court of public opinion, which the average abuser may not, right? They're not in the court of public opinion in the same way. And he had a lot of power probably to influence the Yale Child Studies Center and or other professional agencies and professionals because of who he was. And that's a difference. But what's identical is the flipping of the narrative, blaming the protective parent for brainwashing the child into believing something so heinous, which they would never do. And what we see is that that flipping of the script is very successful even without Woody Allen. It's very successful with any man who can come to court and present decently. And it turns out that many, many sexual abusers, especially, all kinds of abusers too, to some degree, present very well in court. In fact, there's a great article, and I wish I could remember it, but I can dig it out if need be at some point, that I just saw that talks about how, your best friends, people we know and love, people who do good things in the world can be sexual abusers. And courts are just duped by the fact that someone presents like a decent human being and says that they love their kids. And then they have this whole cottage industry of parental alienation to back the denial and to make it sound like a scientific truth, the denial. And so courts are misled by that all the time, even without it being Woody Allen. It's really, I think Woody was unique in the celebrity, and that mattered in his celebrity world in Hollywood and in the public, but other abusers do just fine in court. And ironically, Woody Allen did not do fine in court. The film does not go into that in much depth at all, but it was remarkable to see how effectively that family court judge protected Dylan and Ronan, and I forget who the third child was, and said any visitation was to be supervised and limited, and completely rejected Woody Allen's storyline. I was inquiring about that after the film, and it turns out that the judge, who is unfortunately died young and no longer with us, was married to a domestic violence lawyer who is still with us and who's written an essay about it. And he saw through Woody Allen, but nowadays, whether it's Woody or someone else, most judges don't see through them in part because the courts are steeped in the pseudoscience of parental alienation and the denial of abuse.
You anticipated one of my questions, because I was shocked when I saw the film that the judge was so protective of the children, and even discredited the Yale study. So I guess, and one of my, a small concern is that it might be a takeaway from the film might be that that's what judges usually do. I mean, it's what they're supposed to do, right? If you're faced with evidence that a child is being harmed by a parent, then you would think that the judge, their priority is to make sure that the child is safe. And that's what happened here. And you would think that always happens, but do you want to talk about how often it doesn't happen?
Well, sure. And I'm sorry to go off video again. You were breaking up, Sasha, so I didn't want to slow things down. Yeah, how often that doesn't happen. I mean, everyone, I think much of this audience is well aware of how often it doesn't happen anecdotally. And the data, the reason I did the study was to get real numbers, to see what's really going on. And what we found was that overall, courts disbelieve any kind of family abuse allegation more than half the time. It's not accepted more than half the time. And when you break it down and just look at child abuse, it's rejected and disbelieved more than 2/3 of the time. And when you look at sexual abuse, it's rejected and disbelieved more than 80% of the time. So the idea that courts are in the role of protector it's a complicated one. And it's one of the reasons I'm doing some new work around the child protection role of family courts. But they don't think of themselves as child protectors. They think if kids need protecting, then they're in the system, the child welfare system. And they think that if they're not in the child welfare system and the child welfare system is not protecting the kid doesn't need protecting, and that they can take that to mean the mother is lying. So there's a real problem with the siloing of the systems and the belief that child protection is somewhere out there, not in the family court, or in criminal, they think, or criminal officials would be prosecuting, which is insane when it comes to child sexual abuse. It's so hard to prosecute and so rarely prosecuted, not because it's not true, but because it's hard to convict. And courts just take it for granted that if neither of those two systems is handling it, then it's not real, and we can demonize the mother for falsely alleging it. I think that's part of it. I think part of it is the pseudoscience of parental alienation, which has really kind of poisoned family courts into believing that women often lie about abuse, especially sexual abuse. I think part of it is the cottage industry of professionals who do that kind of denying, complex denying, and also the lack of abuse expertise among these professionals who courts rely on all the time, as though they're going to know what's true and what's safe for the child, when in fact what they know is parental alienation is bad and abuse is often falsely alleged or exaggerated, and they lack any real expertise about any kind of abuse, let alone sexual abuse, that would enable them to identify and connect the dots in the family to say, oh, that's why mother did this, and that's why kid is being like that, and so on and so forth. Just to give you one example, a case that you know well, one of my early cases early DV LEAP cases, a case in DC where the forensic evaluator observed a session between the 4-year-old and her dad, and 4-year-old had, in child appropriate language, reported sexual abuse, and they did a supervised visit, and 4-year-old seemed really affectionate with her dad. So forensic evaluator writes a report saying, oh, she was so affectionate and comfortable with her dad, so it seems really unlikely that these allegations are true. Well, that's just a basic misconception about sexually abused children, period. That's just ignorance. But that's the kind of ignorance that is informing courts all over the place. And courts don't even know what they and their experts don't know. So it's a mix of things. It's a desire to deny it, a desire to protect father's rights, which is a very strong value system in family court. It's definitely some misogyny and a willingness to believe that women lie and women are crazy and all that stuff. And it's an enormous amount of ignorance and dependence on the wrong experts.
Yikes.
Sorry.
I know. Oh, believe me, I know. But still, never ceases to amaze me when you actually kind of walk through it and walk through the reality of it. And I guess that leads us to the kind of the role of this film and what you see the value of this film. On two levels. I guess first, just in terms of increasing public awareness, which, as you mentioned, really needs to be increased. But what do you think, what kind of impact do you think or hope this film will have for family law practitioners trying to protect or trying to represent parents who are trying to protect their kids, and more broadly?
It's a great question. And I'm happy to say that the producer team, they've been doing a series of films about sexual abuse and system failure, and they are very determined or eager to help reform the system. So we are now in conversation with them about where and how they can use the film as an educational tool. And some of the things we're talking about is potentially with lawmakers, federal and state, but also potentially with groups like the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, to whether they would sponsor a showing of, it would have to be clips, it wouldn't be a 4-hour showing, but clips that are relevant to courts potentially. And use it educationally that way. So show some clips and then have a panel of experts and the producers to talk about linking the Woody Allen story to what goes on today. So we're talking about the NCJ, FCJ, we're talking about other professional associations. I'm interested in seeing them bring it to some of the health professions who, for instance, the child abuse pediatricians, which have a pretty robust professional association, but they're very, very not aware of what's going on in family court, and have actually not been very receptive when we've tried to tell them. And I think potentially the film could pull them in and then open up the awareness in that way. And groups like that, the more we can get groups that are clearly not those with an axe to grind, that are just there to help children, and that's their whole professional identity, the more we can wake up those groups, which is another thing the center is devoted to, the more likely we're going to be able to reform the courts and change the culture around these issues. When the complaints and the critiques start coming from child abuse pediatricians or other health professionals or whatever, it's much more likely they'll listen than when they come from the domestic violence field and the abuse specialists like ourselves who are connected to the courts. Now, in terms of waking up lawyers, I actually haven't focused on that. That's a really good question. And maybe you or the audience will have some ideas of who else, what other associations or venues that the film could be brought to be used to educate lawyers as well as judges and other professionals. And, they're very open to suggestions of venues and groups that we could bring this to. So I welcome those thoughts.
And I apologize if you've already
freezing
said
again.
That. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, Sasha. Now I hear you. Sorry, I missed whatever came before.
No,
that.
I was saying, all I said was that you might have said this before, so sorry if I'm repeating, but do the film producers have plans to make any other films that further this purpose?
No, that's a great question. I've been begging them from before they interviewed me to do a whole film on family court, on many more dimensions of family court. And I have not gotten a lot of response to that. I do understand that they're doing some research with a particular expert professional, which I think would be a lens onto family court potentially, but I'm not sure that's the angle they're pursuing. I will say this, I've had enormous admiration for both Kirby Dick and Amy Zweering, I think is her name, the two executive producers. But they've been immersing themselves in sexual abuse trauma and the failure of the culture for many, many years. And she did say something about how she's really looking forward to their next film being on a different subject. So it's definitely not going to be their next film. Whether they'll come back to family court remains to be seen.
I know you and I have talked about kind of the value of media as a tool generally in terms of family court reform. What's your sense of specifically the role of a documentary versus the Reveal series or articles in newspapers?
I'm no expert, and I'm sure our audience has opinions too, but I do think that video is more effective than anything in print. I thought you were going to say, what's my thoughts about a documentary versus a fictionalized story? And that's an interesting question, because in the United Kingdom, they did a fictionalized story about coercive control. It's a soap opera about the Archers, and Evan Stark, who's sort of was the bringer of coercive control, criminalizing it to the UK. He said that show was brilliant because everyone woke up from watching that show. So if we could get a series about these issues, it could maybe contribute even more. But the great thing about the documentary is that it's true, and nobody can say, well, they can say that it's false, and people are definitely saying that it's false because it's only one side. But basically, these are all facts from the perspective of one side. They're facts. They're verified facts. So yeah, I mean, I think documentary is better than print, but whether fiction might be even better, I don't know. If there were an ongoing series, it could be pretty powerful too.
Interesting. And I'm not good at monitoring the chat, as I'm not a good multitasker, but I did notice that Lisa Fontes mentioned that there's a series called Dirty John, which discusses cases of coercive control. I've never heard.
Yes, I've heard of that too, and I need to look it up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, and then in reference to the burning bed, which is true.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That was the first. I mean, I was in law school when that came out, and when that cover story on Newsweek about the burning bed, I went out and bought 10 copies of the Newsweek because I was so excited to see something about domestic violence in the mainstream media. But nowadays, I think in the world we live in nowadays, I don't think print media would have the same effect. But the burning bed was a movie, so yeah.
right, right. Have there been any that you're aware of organized backlash against the documentary?
I'm not aware of an organized backlash. There has been a growing bit of backlash. Obviously, Woody Allen and Soon Yi have objected to it and said it's all lies, lies, lies. And one of the other children, who's now an adult, has taken Woody's side. He's actually a psychologist, I believe. He's taken Woody's side and said none of it ever happened. But it's all proven in the documentary. The train set is proven. I mean, they can say it wasn't there, but it's the police documented it in the police report. So, so there's that. I can't say I'm aware of an organized backlash, and it's interesting question. Where are the fathers' rights groups? I don't know. I don't know on this, but it's kind of a blessing not to be hearing from them. At least I'm not hearing from them on that subject.
It was. I found it almost sad. So the other child that's kind of flipped, siding with Woody, Moses.
Right.
Plus, just what you said, he came out with these things about how the train was made up or what have you, and they were all
documented.
I mean, it was so obviously corroborated. I felt bad, and I also that he was the one who I think really had looked up the most to Woody as a father figure. So you know,
that's right. That's right. And I think you could have a really interesting psychologist commentary on that. I immediately thought, well, he wanted and needed Woody so much as a child. This is his way of having Woody, and it matters more to him than having Mia and Dylan. So, yeah.
And more than the truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really heartbreaking to see that aspect of it too. Well, we've got tons of questions, so and I want to leave lots of time for those questions. But is there anything else that we haven't talked about? Do you think it's important to share?
Questions. Thank you, Sasha.
Did I go out?
No, I think you were cutting out there for a second. Sasha, I'm going to jump in here with monitoring the chat and some of the questions. And so if you have additional questions, please do put them in the chat. Happy to take some of those now. Joan, a couple of things that did come up. One of the questions, or rather it was more of a comment, could you speak a little bit to the reform that's needed around CPS workers as well as GALs and their part in all of this?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things the center's trying to do, well, at least I'm trying to do with my scholarship, and I hope to do some conferences with CPS to wake them up to the scam that parental alienation has become. And let me be clear, because I'm always challenged on this. I'm not saying there's no such thing as one parent turning a child against another. I mean, Woody Allen's done it with Moses. It definitely happens, and abusers are very skilled at it. And I'm sure some non-abusers do it too. But using it to deny abuse is the scam. There is no scientific basis for that. There's no, anyway, so child welfare needs to understand that when alienation is brought up as a reason not to believe abuse, it's just junk. It's junk science. It's denial, and they need to see past it. But unfortunately, child welfare is so overwhelmed and so supported, under-resourced, and under-trained and staffed that I think anything that allows them to get rid of a case, they will jump at, and parental alienation is very handy that way, although they do sometimes use it to open a case against mothers, which is tragic. So child welfare, you know, they need clear education about the limits of family court and the problems with parental alienation, and they really need more quality training around child abuse. Believe it or not, a lot of these frontline staff at child welfare don't even have college degrees, and they don't necessarily have meaningful training in child sexual abuse or child abuse. It's remarkable, but the system is so underfunded that it just isn't done in an expert way. So that needs to change, and I'm hoping to, as I say, bring child welfare and family court and abuse professionals together to try to wake up some of the leading figures in child welfare, and hope that we can develop trainings and market them and get them out with a bunch of other colleagues like the Safe and Together Institute who could help do this and are already doing some really important work. So that's child welfare. Guardians ad litem, it's remarkable, and nobody can quite understand why guardians ad litem, who are supposed to be children's best interest advocates, have proven to be so biased against mothers reporting abuse. But it seems that they're biased by their financial incentives for repeat appointments, and they are taken in by parental alienation, and they too are ignorant, and so they just get on the bandwagon of denial. What needs to be done about them? I mean, I think training needs to really change, and that's one thing that we're working on at both the federal and state levels, Danielle and I, to get quality training for guardians ad litem as well as evaluators that really speaks truth about child abuse and how it manifests, and common misconceptions that are not true and all of that, as well as about alienation. Training is one thing. Some people like Richard Ducote have called for abolishing guardians ad litem in these cases. I don't think our court system's ever going to do that. But it might be possible to, if training were well established, to require that before you can be appointed, to have it be renewed annually or biannually, some requirements that make GALs jump through some hoops. And if they really hate dealing with abuse, they may not want to jump through those hoops. That's one possibility. Another possibility is to change the way they're paid, because the financial incentives in this whole system are so disastrous. We need a system where you are not dependent for your future income on what you say as an expert or a GAL in court, so that whichever way you come out will not affect whether you're reappointed. It has to be, I think people need to be salaried court staff, so that they're not incentivized to please the judge because they won't get another appointment. That's one thing that I think could be helpful, although nobody but me is really talking about it.
Okay. Another question, Joan. Do you have any other advice for attorneys and advocates trying to help parents that find themselves in this type of catch-22?
Oh my God, that's such a huge question. I mean, I get emails from desperate mothers and occasionally fathers every day, and like, help. And I'm like, and mainly what I do is I say, do you have a lawyer? Happy to talk to them about strategy. Do you need an expert? Two things. I think lawyers need to know what they're up against, and a lot of them really have no idea. So a lot of that is that they need to bring in experts like you all, Sasha and me, and others like us, Child Justice, to educate them quickly on the nature of the dynamic of these cases and how to combat it. And then how you combat it is being really knowledgeable so you can cross-examine the expert really effectively. And often, if at all possible, bringing in your own expert who gives you the platform for attacking the alienation expert and for validating the abuse claims. I mean, I don't know a better way than getting the right kind of lawyer with the right kind of support and the right kind of expert. And I know that's very hard for people who don't have money. And I don't have a solution on that yet, although, we, and I know you, DV LEAP, try to support with consultation as much as we can.
That's great. Thanks, Joan. Another question. Do you see any option or possibility of the MeToo movement maybe evolving into a place where it picks up this particular cause? Do you see any overlap?
That's a wonderful question. The last article that I finally got accepted at Georgetown, I originally called it #ChildrenToo, and I was basically saying, for God's sake, you have to realize what's going on in families to children. I ended up changing that name, but I may go back to it. And yes, we are all, this whole field, as I'm sure you all know, is crying out for MeToo to come to family court. A really brilliant writer and survivor that I know in California has written a brilliant op-ed in which she puts, I think, #MeTooHome. It's another way of doing it. But anyway, it needs to catch on. I'm not a social media expert, but someone needs to do what was done for the MeToo movement around this subject to get the traction on this subject. Although, to be honest, there is already so much social media on this subject. I don't know if it's going to rise to the level of the mainstream media's attention the way the original MeToo movement did, but something like that needs to be done around family abuse and family court. I agree.
Joan, somebody else asked about use of the press. I know that you already made a distinction between, the value of print media versus things like this particular documentary or other video or even social media. What about press for individual cases? Is that helpful for someone, a parent, to go to the press about their case, or can that backfire?
As I'm sure you're well aware at DV LEAP, as you were when I was there, it tends to backfire. In every case I've ever seen a mother go to the press, she was punished draconianly, not a word, by the court, with more punishment in terms of access to the kids and more silencing it in every other venue, and just demonized as an evil parent. What parent would ever go to the press about their child and claiming abuse in the media? Why would you ever do that to your child? So I'm sorry to say that as long as you're still fighting in court, going to the press is just never a good thing for your case. And as someone pointed out, you will get gagged, yeah, if you're not already. But the thing that makes that really hard is that, of course, abusers go to the press in cases and get away with it, and I've seen that too, because the courts are not holding the men accountable anywhere near the way they're holding women accountable. So it's a problem in an individual case, but there are a sad number of people who, jailed in Colorado. There's a sad number of people who are at a point where the court can do no more damage to them because either their child was murdered by the abuser or they have lost permanent custody and all contact, and they have nothing more to lose. And those are the people that I say, if you don't plan to be back in court anytime soon, I see no downside to going to the press. But that is another reason this problem does not change enough. The world doesn't hear about it enough because of the cannot.
Joan, you're cutting out a little bit.
Kids.
Could
Okay.
You want to repeat that?
I was gonna. Yeah, I was just saying that even after a case, it's very often mothers are not willing to go to the press by name even then because of the flack that it will cause for their children, even if their children are young adults. I mean, it's the trauma that's done to families in these cases is so crippling in terms of getting the story out. Getting the story out can increase trauma. I mean, Dylan Farrow she took a long time, I think over a year, to come around to agreeing to do this film because she and her family had been so demonized in the press, thanks to Woody, for decades. And she finally decided, and she's been clearly in very productive therapy, she finally decided that it was good for her to go public and it was going to be healing for her. But that was a very tough choice for her, even though she's perfectly safe. So dealing with trauma and the after effects of trauma can be a lifetime problem, and press, can be vindicating, but it can also create backlash. It's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Joan, could you speak a little bit to, this is such a tough issue and there are just so many barriers to access to justice. It's a depressing reality. Can you speak a little bit to the places where you do see hope, or some of the perhaps positive changes that you've witnessed, or things that you're looking forward to, perhaps even in your own work going forward?
That's a great question. Thank you, Leanne. It's kind of ironic and double-edged, but one of the places I see hope is that as a result of some of these horrific child murders that occurred after courts were begged and pleaded with to protect a child, lawmakers, state legislators are paying attention in a lot of states, are starting to step up and say, and I'm talking about Pennsylvania, Caden's Law, Connecticut, the two Jennifer's Law, New York, Kira's Law, which has not passed yet, but is in process. And a lot of other states are responding to these child murders in a new way. Instead of thinking it's a horrible one-off tragedy, they're starting to get that there are systemic forces leading to these horrible outcomes and that the system needs to be changed. And so I am seeing some change on the legislative front across states, and even at the federal level. There is a hopeful provision in the Violence Against Women Act about child safety and family court that we had something to do with, that, if the VAWA ever passes, that we hope will be in there. So I'm seeing legislators listening and paying attention. I am seeing some folks in court policy arenas understanding the problem with alienation and trying to figure out what to do about it. I am seeing, I mean, I was just emailing with a guy in New York who's being falsely accused of alienation by his psychopathic ex-wife. And he thinks the New York courts are starting to get it. And he's pointing to a particular great decision in New York, the JF decision, where the court really took down two of the leading names in parental alienation field and said, this is bunk. It was a wonderful decision, but it's only trial court opinion. But he thinks that maybe they're starting to wake up. So it may be that the trend is just starting to slow and turn around. I will say one other thing that's a little bit of a sign of hope is that the alienation field itself, it's a mixed bag, but they are moving away from the term parental alienation because I think they're seeing, as a result of these horrible stories and our research and all of the critiques, they're starting to see that parental alienation as a label and an explanation is really problematic. So now they're talking about a multifactorial approach. They call it children resisting and refusing contact. And they claim that that means that it could be for any reason, including legitimate reasons. And while I like that in theory, in a vacuum, in historical context and in court cases, it has not changed anything. You still have the same experts saying, it's multifactorial, and yes, there was domestic violence, but the mom is alienating and that needs to stop, and the kids are not being protected with that kind of analysis. So there's some hope that the cottage industry is turning away from alienation a little bit, but when they will ever come around to what we've known all along, which is that it's being misused to deny abuse, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah. That's really helpful, Joan. And we're almost out of time here. We're at 12:58. So as a way to wrap up, a lot of people are, first of all, do you have any concluding comments? And I'll finish up and close this out at the very end. But any final thoughts? Also, people are asking for ways that they can support you and your work. And so wanted to give you an opportunity to put in a plug for the center and ways that people could do that.
That is so kind of you, Leanne, because I know DV LEAP needs support as well. But yes, we are the law school houses me, but I raise all the funds for my salary and Danielle, for my half of my salary, the non-academic half of my salary, and for Danielle's salary, and she's still part-time because we have not yet raised a full-time salary for her, and for other things that we do and hope to do, including conferences. So anyone who's willing or able to contribute, there is a donate button that I can put out, but I don't have handy, I'm sorry to say. I can put it out to DV LEAP if you're willing to circulate, or people can contact me by email and I'll point them to that. That's one thing. Another thing is we're happy to add you to our newsletter, so contact me about that. A third thing is that we want to create affiliated organizations. We want to grow, and actually I should have asked you, Leanne, we want to grow the number of other nonprofits and organizations that care about family and abuse, as to have a long list of partners who share our mission and support our mission. We're hoping to get child welfare oriented groups, child centric groups, as well as domestic violence and other health professionals to sign on, because we think having a long list of sign on partners will help us when we're doing legislative work and other types of reform efforts. So if you are from a nonprofit that would like to be an affiliated organization with the center, please also let me know about that. Danielle, maybe you can put your email in the chat if you're still there, and people can reach out to you. So those are the three things that would be wonderful.
That's great. Excellent. Well, with that, we are at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to close this out today. Flora wanted me to remind you all that because you registered for this event, you will receive the recording afterwards. And in that email with a link to the recording of this session, you will also receive the links, for example, to Joan's newsletter. So just so you can be aware, you'll be receiving that information from us. Also, I just want to say thank you to everyone today. If you would like to, in addition to getting involved with Joan and her center, we also welcome you to get involved with DV LEAP. We do rely on your support to provide these services for survivors in the same way that Joan's center is also, we're nonprofit. So we need everyone's help and support to continue to do the good work. And there are other ways that you can be involved with DV LEAP as well. If you're a lawyer getting involved with our cases, sign up for our newsletter too. We also have the October 10th event. Please put that on your calendar. You'll be getting more information about that later. And we also have the Advocacy Council as another opportunity for young professionals. So reach out to us, any number of ways that you can get involved, and also let us know what else you'd like to know. We want to continue to have these free events, these informational educational events. What other topics are you interested in? And this was so widely popular, maybe we want to do a part 2. So send us your ideas for that as well. We welcome them and would appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much to Joan. Really can't just say thanks enough, how grateful we are for your time today, for the incredible, remarkable work, inspiring work, Joan, that you continue to do. There's never enough time. We crammed a lot in. So thank you, Joan, for all that you do and for your time. Sasha, thank you so much for engaging Joan in a conversation. It was fabulous. We all learned a lot. Listen, thank you so much, everybody. Please be in touch with us and with Joan. Really appreciate your support and being here today. Can't do it without you. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.